Good afternoon, friends. So nice to see you all on this beautiful day. One of many to come. It's spring, right? We made it? I know, I'm breaking the rule. You're not supposed to say that. Hi, everyone. I'm Casey Riley. I am Chair of Global Contemporary Art here at MIA, and it is my delight and my honor to welcome all of you to this artist talk this afternoon with Nick Cave. Nick Cave, as you know, describes himself as an artist, an educator, and foremost, a messenger. Working between the visual and performing arts through a wide range of mediums, including sculpture, installation, video, sound, and performance. He's been the subject of numerous exhibitions, including a 2022 retrospective that was organized by the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago and traveled to the Guggenheim Museum in New York. In 2025, he will debut a new body of work, including a performance at the Smithsonian American Museum of Art in Washington, D.C., which will be accompanied by a monograph. And I'm hoping we'll get to talk more about that today. Since the 1990s, Nick Cave has created spaces of memorial through combining found historical objects with contemporary dialogues on gun violence and death. He's perhaps best known for his Soundsuits, sculptural forms based on the scale of his body, which were initially created in direct response to the police beating of Rodney King in 1991. Soundsuits camouflage the body, masking and creating a second skin that conceals race, gender, and class, forcing the viewer to look without judgment. They serve as a visual embodiment of social justice that represents both brutality and empowerment. The human figure remains central to his work as Cave casts his own body in bronze, an extension of the performances that are vital to his practice. And of course, you can see two of his Soundsuits today in the museum, one in Giants and the other on this floor as you leave. While anxiety, despair, and catastrophic loss are inherent to this work, there remains space for hope and renewal. His work encourages a profound and compassionate analysis of violence and its effects as the path towards an ultimate metamorphosis. In a world that feels increasingly defined by volatility and uncertainty, Nick Cave asks that we awaken ourselves to shared issues and challenges, come together on a global scale, instigate change, and ultimately heal. So, we're going to begin with a film that Nick has provided for us, and then after that film, we'll step onto the stage and start talking together. Please welcome Nick Cave. Are we on? I think we're doing it. Wait, you have to push it up. There you go.
We're on.
All right. Nick, it's been so much fun to talk to you today, and I'm really excited to continue the conversation with all of our friends here. I think what we'll do is probably talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to them and see what they have for us. Does that sound good?
It sounds great.
Awesome. Well, I was glad that I had forgotten the film actually ended on the suit with the sticks, and one of my initial questions for you was just talking about the origin of the Soundsuits, which obviously come from a response to police violence. But you were, as I've understood it, you were in a park and you were thinking about the events and your own response to them emotionally and socially, and there were sticks on the ground, right? And that was how... Yeah, so I wonder if you want to talk about the origins of not just that Soundsuit, but the evolution and origin of the Soundsuits from your practice.
Well, the first Soundsuit was constructed of twigs, but it was in response to Rodney King in '92. And so, for me, it was, I think that was the first time that we had ever seen this type of violence on camera. I mean, for me as a person of color, it had been going on. But for us publicly, it was the first sort of real sort of moment. And so that was like extremely shocking. And, you know, as I was sort of trying to work through that and then also sort of reading about the incident and just coming across, you know, it made me start to think about, like, you know, how I felt and sort of, you know, like what it feels like to feel discarded, less than, and you know, this twig was on the ground, I don't know, and I just started to collect all of these twigs, because to me that object was sort of symbolically represented that it was something that I could just kick out of the way and dismiss, but
Right.
yet I was gathering up all of this material. Bringing it back to the studio and thinking I was building a sculpture and didn't even realize that I could put this object on the body. And so the moment that once I realized that, then it sort of shielded me from society. So it was, on one hand, a suit of armor. Then on the other hand, the moment I moved in it, it made sound. So it led me to think about the role of protest, and in order to protest, you've got to speak louder. And so it just started to sort of open up all of these amazing sort of ways in which I could sort of address, you know, this sort of heinous violence on Black and brown bodies. And it just led me to think about material and surplus and excess and just what we're surrounded by. There's just so much stuff. And for me, that stuff allowed me to sort of question the value of excess and how to sort of reimagine how that can all be used. And
Thinking about things to hand, thinking about consumer culture.
exactly.
And using what you have to hand and not discarding it. I think we were fortunate earlier to walk through the galleries with you and a couple of artists from Juxtaposition Arts, and you talked a little bit about your construction of the Soundsuit that's in Mia's collection. And on that point of referencing popular culture, thinking about materials to hand, can you just spend a moment or two and tell us about your thinking when you were making that, so that when all of you leave here and go and look at it, you'll see it anew?
Yeah, you know, the Soundsuit that's here in the permanent collection, you know, I'm not really one who sort of sketches anything. I spend more time just writing ideas down. But, you know, that particular Soundsuit, it's really sort of like how my head is sort of, you know, it's always sort of full of ideas, and they're just sort of swarming around my head. So I'm thinking about that, but then I'm thinking about, like, just these sort of roles in which one has to play within society and multitasking. And so I'm thinking like this one-man band, and so it becomes this sort of sound instrument. It becomes this sort of object that sort of surrounds the body, which could be an aura of sorts. But then there are these Jack-in-the-Box toys that are on there too, and so, which led me to think about, like, you know, boom, pop up. How do we stand in space? How do we sort of stand in the room? How do we sort of
show up
and be present? And so,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
so it's, you know, it becomes sort of like this amalgam of just sort of ideas that
Yeah.
then start to morph
Yeah.
into a form and you know, in nostalgic sort of memory and things of that sort.
And I think about yourself in the context of that constellation of constant swirl and you know, distraction, and the centeredness of your body in all of it. You know, I often look at these and I think about how you describe them as a kind of armor or camouflage, but they also enchant. They draw us in. And I think we really see this with your film, too. And I was sitting with some very appreciative people who were like, ooh, and ah, you know, every time a new sound suit would come on and get activated. But can you talk to us about that tension that's inherent to the work, that it sparkles, it glows, it brings you in, it's colorful, but it's also meant to deflect something? Because I think that tension is really unique to your practice.
Yeah, you know, the tension that's in the work. Oh my God, I'm like,
I know. Let's get comfortable.
yeah, right. That tension in the work is, you know, I think that it sort of lends itself to sort of, you know, I think like as a young sort of black male, you cross the street and you could hear someone's car door lock. So it's that, like, you know, it's that like moment of, you know, you're sort of identified as scary or threatened or a threat. And so for me, that's really what I'm sort of talking about there within the work. But at the same time, I'm also I'm sort of embellishing that, and then I'm also thinking about, you know, how I was raised and as this sort of amazing young black male, and you're beautiful and you're a lovely person and things of that sort. So it's this contradiction to these two worlds in which I have to sort of find balance. And one certainly trumps the other, but it's sort of toying around with sort of blurring those sort of lines of the unfamiliar, the scary, but yet the sort of seduction, the draw, the sort of like the sort of volume of an emotion from both sides. So it's really sort of me not really sort of shunning away from anything. It's really sort of taking all of these realities and sort of structuring how I sort of navigate and sort of move through the world.
You know, I wasn't going to talk about this, but you've talked about it in a number of interviews. You just talked about coming from a really loving family, raised by your mom, and in the context of 7 brothers. When you're creating these sculptures, when you're thinking about your performance, how much are you drawing on that? I mean, you're talking about that love, but are you also thinking about those relationships? Are they coming in to construct the world that is Nick Cave's imagination?
You mean family?
Yeah, your brothers and your mom and.
No, not really.
Yeah. It was worth a shot, right?
I mean, no, not really. They, you know, we're a very close family.
Yeah.
They're 110% there for me for the work.
Yeah.
But we don't really sit down and like talk about the work.
Oh,
But you know, they are very much a part of you know, my existence. I mean, to you know, my mother is one of 18, so
wow.
you know,
Yeah.
there's just this amazing sort of dynamic in terms of, and then I really come from a sort of family of makers.
Oh,
You know, like poets, painters, seamstresses, woodworkers. I mean, that really was my sort of upbringing. That was, you know, that was constantly around me. Although at, you know, at a young age, I was just hanging out with my brothers and
doing what kids do.
doing boy things, whatever that is.
I'm sure it wasn't boring. Well, you know, my next sort of thought and looking over this film and thinking about your practice to date, you know, we're fortunate to have your partner and collaborator, Bob Faust, here today. And I think in the film we get a sense of the bigger, sort of group of people who activate and realize your work. So can you talk a little bit about, how collaboration informs your practice and how you think about, and I guess address other people's necessary participation in your work?
Yeah, my studio is, I have 10 full-time assistants, but sometimes depending on the project, it goes up to 30. And, we're in this amazing space that can sort of accommodate and make that sort of shift when needed. But, I think we all collaborate. It's just how we sort of exist in the world. This film is really, this is really just a documentation for a book that Bob designed. So these are just takes from the book, stills from the book. This really wasn't meant to be a film. We sort of liked the sort of rawness and the sort of fearlessness of it. It was just random.
Yeah.
And those were all historical sites in Detroit.
Yeah.
And so, collaboration is really probably the most important thing to me in my practice versus a solo exhibition. And it's really because when I'm collaborating, if I'm doing a performance, I'll bring the performance to the city, but I will hire everyone there. So I'm not bringing in musicians, I'm not bringing in dancers, I'm not bringing in other artists. I'm really sort of feet on the ground and seeking them out.
Amazing.
And so then we just go into this 2-3 week residency with the community to build the project. And so what's been presented is really not the real work. The real work is sort of the behind the scenes and what happens in that process.
We're seeing the end of it. But so for these sites in Detroit, you found, obviously you and Bob are in some of the suits, but are there other people who you trained to do this over a period of 2 or 3 weeks to perform?
Yes, no. I'm sort of like, we could be in the same suit. You're going to handle it completely different than I am. So I'm sort of just wide open. You've got to be able to sort of ask yourself, can you sort of surrender and become fearless in something other than what you know yourself as? And so, I sort of talk about that if I'm working with people with the suits. I sort of talk about, how do you sort of settle and sort of be open to a transformative sort of experience.
Wow.
So it's a lot of psychological work
Uh-huh.
that has to be done, or else you just lose yourself and you more or less fall apart, I think. Or that's what I see.
Or get overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
So anybody who can wear one of the suits can do it in your mind. They're not
Could.
exclusive to you.
Good. Yeah.
And do you ever learn anything about them?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that, I'm always sort of open to interpretation and improvisation, and to me that's really sort of where the sort of core of the work sort of lies, is within this sort of unknown sort of territory.
It must be more fun for you too, because finally you get to see something that you thought would be one way, and then when it's activated and happening, it's a completely other entity, or it's something that you hadn't anticipated. Then maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about sound, and you did include sound in the final cut of this short, but talk to me more about why Soundsuits, because they are so material, they're so visual. You know, how are you thinking through what kinds of sounds they make? And also, when you were doing the soundtrack for the film, what were your thought processes or intentions?
Well, the sounds that you hear in the film are really the sounds that were really sort of just projected from the materials in which these suits were made from. I'm not really thinking about like sound at the front end because I don't know what
Okay.
that is until it's made.
Ah, okay.
You know, it's really because, you know, to make a suit is really, it's an abundance of material. It really takes a lot. And so, and then I discover sound once that is done. And so I can be in control of whether or not it's loud or very subtle, as well as my body and gestures could sort of operate the same way. So, and I don't think this really sort of shows you, the film really didn't show you what the sort of full capacity of performance suit
There's a lot of
can
swishing.
deliver.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about setting. And I mean, we can talk about some of the work that we see here, but I'm thinking that you're someone who works in installation, you're someone who works in performance. You also think in terms of still works that will be stilled, maybe is a better way of putting it, because they're not meant to be still, but they are stilled by nature of not having you near them. So how do you think through setting and place when you're imagining one of your, you know, suits or beings for a space? And then are you ever creating a suit hoping that it will make a space that's unique and different? Or talk about creating universes and spaces. I think that's where I'm going with this.
I don't know if I think about, the work first,
Okay.
always. It's really, I'm thinking really about sculpture, probably first foremost. Space is, I sort of look at space as the sort of arena, the place in which the work is placed. And so, I sort of, any solo project, I always sort of do a site visit first, just to get an understanding of just what that space is from an architectural perspective, before I even think about like a placement of work. And I think about it in terms of like choreography. So, when I'm designing a show, I'm really thinking about like, how do I want the audience to move through? So it doesn't only happen, work is not just what happens in the studio. The other part of the work is the execution of the work. So
When it's activated, when people are moving it.
that, or if it's still,
Ah, okay.
so it's all really sort of like a dance to me. So I'm sort of thinking about like where the objects are placed in space and how does that sort of set within the architecture of the room. And then I'm thinking about how does the physical self move within the context of all of that. So so there's like really 3-4 parts of really the conclusion of it all sort of coming together and being fully what it needs to be.
Got it. Got it. I want to return to what we were talking about at the top of our conversation. When you were responding to the beating of Rodney King, that was something that you experienced, I'm assuming, as most of us did, through the camera, through television. And I know that you're someone who works in camera or thinks about film as a part of your practice. but how does it fit in? Because as you said, it starts sculpturally for you. You're thinking about that object first. Where and how does the camera, does lens work, come into play? And yeah, where does it fit into your broader sort of understanding of your work?
I think it fits into when, again, I sort of, when I film the camera, it sort of opens up the work. Even, I think if that's where I probably draw. Instead of like physically drawing, I'm drawing through the lenses. So that's where I sort of generate new shapes by, a still that I caught, someone jumping in the air and like, oh, this form is interesting. And so then that sort of can sort of direct a new sort of shape that sort of enters the work. So, I think I just have always remained extremely wide open to, like, it's never, this is the final way.
With
It's
any work?
With
Okay.
any work. It's never like the end of anything. It's yet the beginning of something else.
It's imbued with possibility. I love that. So when you're working towards something, do you have still images printed out, or are you looking at a screen? How does the camera fit into the sort of iterative or ideative process? For you?
I'm sort of like, looking through my phone.
Yeah,
And stuff.
just like the rest of us. I like that one.
And I'm
Yeah.
just, and then I will just loosely sketch it out. I really don't sort of have a sort of like a board of ideas. I just don't work that way. I just sort of do a quick sketch, and I sort of, even when I'm working with my fabricators, at the beginning they thought I was like crazy because I'm like, just make it like this, using my hand gestures.
Yeah.
But, now they understand that it's not that I want it to be, to come with a finalized
Right.
sketch as opposed to this is the general shape, and then we will see where it goes from there.
Co-creating.
And so then it just starts to morph into what it needs to be, and it's fluid. And that's really critical.
I love that, and the process is mediated by seeing it through the camera, and the camera helps you to see differently or to evolve it. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. Well, we're here in part because of Giants and the Dean Collection.
It looks amazing here.
Thank you. We're very proud of it. Teamwork. But your suit in that show is so important. And we talked a little bit about it downstairs, but can you talk about its fabrication? Like, talk about how does that suit inhabit reality versus maybe another one? Like, what are its invocations or evocations? I love its buttons. I'm obsessed with the buttons.
Yeah. That one in relationship to the one you have here. Again, this sort of form here is sort of me looking at sort of Kuba cloths and sort of pulling out a shape there. But then this also is functioning as a filter that I can see out, but you can't see in.
Oh,
So it's me thinking about like ways in which I move through the world, and and again, the buttons become the sort of armor of sorts. So I'm thinking about, again, sort of materials that sort of are read as one thing and then also reflect something else.
Yeah. Well, I look at those buttons and I think about expensive cashmere sweaters because they're that beautiful mother of pearl, that
Yeah.
black mother of pearl that,
I was in New York
Yeah.
once, and I was in the garment district, and I'm like, oh God, where am I gonna find thousands of buttons? And then I sort of ran across a flea market,
oh, yeah,
and there was this guy there.
with a bunch of boxes.
Oh my God. Sandy.
great.
And Sandy had just bought a button company
Amazing.
in Texas. And I swear to you, I was like, oh my God. And so that was
Yeah.
my sort of resource for,
Yeah.
All the buttons.
Sandy's your button connection. I love
But,
it.
I wanted to, again, and then I wanted to strip away the sound suit a bit.
Yeah.
And get rid of color and just sort of all these sort of other sort of elements and devices that made it sort of fantastical and just streamline. And so that was again me sort of shifting how I sort of thought about the work, but still wanted to shield myself from the world.
I love that 1,000,000 buttons is your gesture towards minimalism.
Yeah.
That's excellent. My kind of guy. Just to pivot a little bit, I learned a lot from talking to both of the deans on this stage a month ago about, how they've built their collection, the intentionality behind it, the familial nature of it. And I wondered if you're comfortable, like, just sharing what it means to be a part of a cohort like that, or what, how that plays out. I know there's a group chat, so, yeah. So, yeah, what's that like?
Well, I think it's important to be, part of a cohort that looks like you. I think it's important that to look at, Black excellence through the visual lens.
Right.
And to be in that sort of space. I mean, it's funny, I was just talking to Swizz the other day. He just had went to my show in New York.
Yep.
And he's like,
At Jack Shaneman.
at Jack Shaman, yeah. And this is a new body of work. In that particular show, there's a 26-foot bronze.
Yeah.
I think it was
Yeah.
here somewhere at the
Yeah, yeah.
end. And so, for me, I've been trying to get to a 26-foot bronze probably within the last sort of 7 years.
Yeah.
And then just one day I just said, fuck it, I'm going to do it.
Yep. Yep.
Because it takes a lot of money, but I was just like, I've just got to gamble.
Yeah.
In order for me to feel that I need to move forward, so I need to take these risks.
Yep.
And it's all or nothing always. And so he texts me like, oh, hell no. Oh, no. What am I going to do?
Because he wants one.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that's good. So it's
So that's
like,
funny.
that is like, that's amazing validation. And also
Yeah.
knowing that you have that kind of ongoing support. I mean,
Yeah.
regardless of what happens with this particular sculpture,
Well,
know.
it's sold, so, and not to him. But,
Alas.
I've been trying to get the work sort of outside of the institutions and out
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
in public space. So
Yeah.
that's really the goal now.
Say more about that. What is important to you about that?
Well, I think it's like the performance work, a lot of it always happens out there. And so how do we get I'm just interested in sort of bringing community together through these visual sort of invitations, and how do we collectively, share and have sort of these sort of experiences together. And there's still sort of communities that still don't frequent museums, and
Yeah.
as an artist, what do what role do we play within the context of all that?
Right. And public art is definitely something that
Yeah.
can answer that. I love that. Well, you've talked a little bit about your work at Shaneman, but I think my next set of questions are really about that and also about your joint venture facility in New York, and just talking about how you see the work of that going forward, and if you want to talk about anything that will come after that, that would be exciting. If you feel like telling us anything about your show at SAM, we'd love to hear it.
Well,
Great time to be doing
yeah, right.
show at a federal museum. Woo.
But it must happen. Trust me. I think the show in New York really is a new body of work.
Yep.
Yep. And so after the sort of Guggenheim show, I sort of took 3, maybe 4 years off of making. Like I was just doing research and thinking. Bob was like, "Are you okay? You haven't made anything." And I'm like, "I'm working." He goes, "But you're not made anything." And I'm like, "I'm working." And so, because I think, when you sort of, after a retrospection, I think it's there's a moment of reflection and assessing where you're at, and then, and I was just interested in sort of moving forward and trying to sort of figure out what that meant. And I was thinking about painting, and I'm like, I don't think it's oil, it's not acrylic. What is it? What is this medium? And then all of a sudden, one day, maybe 2.5 years in or 3, needlepoint came to mind.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm needlepointing right now. And part of that show in New York is needlepoint.
Right, yep, that's right.
And it just made it's just sort of the most appropriate sort of shift. Because it's all hand done.
And you can travel with it. You can't travel with a big bronze sculpture.
Well, I can't travel with needlepoint because they're like 4 by 8, so okay. It's not. But it was really sort of, I think it comes down to the essence. How do I transfer the essence of my work into a new sort of direction? And then bronze, I had been doing bronze small works and just sort of just took the leap of faith and did. So, so going forward, it's just really just a very reckless studio practice right now, because it's just.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking like about, public work and public spaces. Yeah, that are.
I love that you're in a generative moment.
But these tariffs are really killing me right now with all of that too. So there has been sort of, it's really
what a time to be alive. Yeah,
it's not good.
I think we're going to open it up to audience members, and a couple of our fabulous colleagues are here with mics. So who's brave? There's a hand. Okay. Anna, you're in charge. Yeah. Oh, wait, looks like Karen's. Okay.
You talk about extending out into the public a little bit more. Have you considered a collaboration with Target?
Not right now. They have to sort of regroup. I'm open.
We have a question in the back.
Hey there, I'm an artist from Australia, and thanks for sharing your work. And I was thinking of 2 artists, 2 Aboriginal artists, Brooke Andrew and Christian Thompson, and I was also thinking of Lee Bowery, and I was just wondering if you could maybe talk about your who really inspires you, what artists really inspire you.
I think there's, lots of artists, but there's also fashion designers, there's dance, There's, in terms of fashion, I'm thinking Schiaparelli, I'm thinking Comme des Garçons, in terms of these, designers that are sort of working in sort of with an art sort of sensibility, but through the lens of fashion. But then I'm also looking at dance and as in choreographers as well as musicians. Kahil Zanzibar is an amazing sort of jazz musician that is fabulous. So it's not that it's any sort of one medium as opposed to everything.
Looks like we have a couple more hands. Have you ever collaborated with a musician? I should probably know this.
Yeah, pretty much with all the performances I try to.
You try to, okay.
Yeah.
I hope I can ask this in a sensible way. I'm just fascinated by your pieces that are like traditional African dance costumes that are really about cosmic rhythms. And so many of your pieces have that flavor about them, that they're cosmic pieces, cosmic rhythms. And I'm just wondering, is that part of your research, your conscious research, or if it's part of your DNA? I think about your 7 brothers and your family that's close, but that you all never talk about your work. So it's like you're carrying that in yourself, and especially because so much of your work has frames of reference that anybody in the African diasporan experience can relate to, whether they were people who were enslaved or who were in apartheid or in the struggle against, or there are all of these references. So how do you string that together? I mean, is that conscious, or if, just
Well,
talk.
I think it's like, when I think about like performance and costume, I think about, I'm looking at the Ogungu. I'm at Trinidad doing festival. I'm Mardi Gras Indian, and then I'm like in the middle of a George Clinton concert in the early sort of 80s, and so it's just a melting pot and just allowing it all to manifest and sort of come out and be, I think more like globally in terms of the outcome. I want it to be from I want it to have an otherness about it, that it's not only rooted here, that we can connect many dots in this sort of universal sort of galaxy space.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Oh, mine was asked actually
we can
basically
do
about the
these.
dance as well.
We can do these too.
Okay, we can do these two.
Because Yoruba culture has the raffia in the masquerade, and so that's definitely something that I was thinking of as well. But my second question, which has no relationship at all, is the bunny. Why does the bunny keep showing up in your work?
Keeps, the bunny.
Yeah,
It does. I think about like multiplying. This idea of, so I think of like my mother, like she had 7 boys. Like, what? But she comes from a family of 18 and she's the first of 18. And so, it was absolutely no problem for her to raise us magnificent
You were like, easy.
men.
Yeah, it's just
Oh,
7
we
or
were very
8.
easy.
Yeah.
Very strict and like no messing around. So it's really sort of that. And again, I think about like, I don't know, I'm thinking about like altered sort of skin and sort of camouflage in this sort of mad kind of sort of daunting sort of world.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it was
Okay.
in the purple scarf. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, Nick, I follow you on Instagram. In a recent post, you shared a clip of a video talking about this new body of work that you just showed in New York. And you were talking about the importance of kind of taking care of yourself and still creating during the hard times like now. Could you elaborate more on that, please?
That's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, self-care is like crucial. I have things in place that I do for that, but I think, being a visual artist, an artist of any sort, I think that we really sort of are the sort of core reflection of what's going on. And, we have always sort of pioneered us forward. And it's, I'm fortunate to have facility, which is the building that me and Bob Fowles operate and run, where we're able, in the storefronts of facility are exhibition spaces that we're not-for-profit, that we invite artists to come and do projects. But in any given moment when there is a crisis, we're able to respond within that space. And so, artists are activists, and so, and that work also gives me great joy to be responsible in these sort of moments. And we all have to find ways in which we can do that, and also it's very healing.
Well, Nick, I think there's no. Oh, one more back here?
I
Okay,
know, I'm
fine.
the
It's
one.
not the right moment to stop.
Hi there. I'm Namir. We spoke a bit earlier,
Yeah.
but I have a question for you because when I look at your work, I'm reminded of how creative a pursuit survival is. And we spoke about that a bit earlier. And what exactly is the line between something that is used to protect us, but that can also make us seemingly more vulnerable or more visible while also being like removed, thinking about possession, thinking about all these things. But the word that I really just want to hear you talk about, if even for a second, is protection. And what does protection mean to you, for you? What has it meant for you in your life and your experience is something that I think a lot about, and I would like to hear you talk about protection.
Protection. I think, I think that we all sort of put things in place to protect ourselves. So I'm willing to sort of be on the front line, but I'm also sort of, and that means my work is on the front line. My physical self is not. And so, again, what are we sort of, what are these sort of mechanisms and devices that we're sort of using to help sort of calibrate and strategically make these sort of moves that need to be made while sort of keeping yourself sort of protected spiritually and physically. So I'm totally like out there, but I can jump back out and sort of go into hiding if necessary. Temporarily. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. And I actually am going to end on what I intended to say a moment ago, which is that, Nick, you are a standard bearer in the art world, but also in the world into which I wish to live. So I thank you for dreaming these spaces for us and for sharing them with us. And I really want to thank everybody for bringing all of your thoughtful questions and attention today. Nick, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you. Thanks.